Welcome back to our classroom. It's been a minute, but we're back at it. Me and Tony, people. I'm excited about this one because I don't even know how long it's been. At least 2 years, maybe 3 years at this point, probably 3 years. With Tony and I did an Instagram live where we were sharing our poetry and responding to each other's content. And it was awesome. It was awesome to see two men connect in this way, to share their literary works, but also to open up and be vulnerable and break down our poetry. And I really enjoyed that experience and connecting with you in that way. So Tony, thank you for being here. And just so y'all know, Tony's a lot of things. He's a lot of things. He's a son, he's a husband, he's a father. So he knows about the beautiful struggle in terms of raising young children. We're both in it together. He's currently a PhD student at UW Madison in education and leadership and policy analysis. I have my master's in education leadership, so I know the road that he's traveling, and he's focusing on researching the impact of ethnic studies and race-based policies on teacher and leadership practices. Boy, is that necessary. And if you don't know, he is the author of Teaching the Invisible Race, embodying a pro-Asian lens in schools. Holla, holla, holla at your boy, Tony DelaRosa. Hey, it's DelaRosa, but I'm Dominican, so DelaRosa
De
naturally
La
comes
Rosa is
out.
perfectly fine for me, man. I actually like it that way. I wish I was socialized to hear it that way more. So I love that.
Man, thanks for being here, man. It's good to see you.
Oh my goodness. Anytime I can get a chance to talk to another father of color in education, especially when the anti-racist lens, done deal. You know what I'm saying? So I'm happy to be here.
My man, my man. Well, salute to you for the book, man. Proud of you for the work that you're putting in. I see you're busy out there in the literary streets, in the ed
Trying.
circles, making it happen. And so
Yep.
I'm glad that you are out there just being the voice, doing the work, engaging people in this conversation. And I certainly have a lot to learn. I know some, but I feel like I have a lot to learn, and I think your book is exposing me to some things. But I'm interested to hear you expound upon it, and certainly I want to start with just staying in the moment, right? Because I read an
Mm.
article recently about the affirmative action ban as it relates to college, to higher ed, and there's some mixed reviews, and it's still early, but it seems like it's kind of backfiring a little bit on that group that had proposed that ban and brought it to the Supreme Court. And so, how do you think the abolition of affirmative action impacts the fight for pro-Asian American identity, as you describe in Teaching the Invisible Race?
Yeah, I think at first I was like, oh, there isn't really much of a big impact yet. And I don't think there is too much yet, right? I think we're just still going to see this is going to be a long marathon of understanding what a repeal like that looks like after many years, after year, like they just released data. I've been following higher education scholars, like specifically Dr. Oyan Poon. She's a mentor of mine, right? She wrote, I'm going to be bouncing off some books, right? So you all some resources. So I'm a resource, but also like this is a resource. Asian Americans is not a color, and this book is kind of a love letter to her daughter, really talking about a conversation of race, affirmative action, and family, right? And the fact that like she's talking to her daughter about affirmative action already tells you that she's thinking about the whole transcendence all the way from higher ed all the way down to elementary school. And I was
Wow,
like,
wow.
dang, that challenges me a lot because I didn't expect that I should be having these conversations. Well, my son is 3, so I'm not having those conversations yet. But with elementary teachers and school leaders in K-12, we should be having those conversations because when I think about like how affirmative action now that repeal is going to be, or the abolishment of that is going to be hurting Black and Latinx enrollment, right? Of course, it hurts Asian American enrollment too. Like
Right.
we've seen mixed reviews. Some of it has like ramped it up, and some of it has ramped it down. So it's really complex. It's dependent upon the school. So we can't really mark and say all Asian Americans are benefiting
Sure.
from it. But it's just I told you so. to my Asians.
Mm.
And it's not even just my Asians, it's specifically right-wing conservative Chinese people who were the plaintiffs and supporters of the plaintiffs for Edward Bloom's racist project. Let's say that. Let's just call it what it is. It's a racist project. Um, and it just backfired because now brown Asians like myself, Southeast Asians, right? South Asians, other like Cambodians, specifically Hmong folks, like they're going to be impacted by it as well, not just Black and Latinx folks, right? And I think that is one point, right, in terms of the admissions aspect. I think about like programs like Trio, right? Like the Trio program. I don't know if you know what Trio
I'm
is, but
familiar.
I wish I knew what it was growing up because I grew up low income first gen, and I was always looking for resources for me to like get just the social capital. When you think about like Yoso's work about social political capital, all that kind of capital, like I didn't really have that growing up as much as my peers did. And I think programs like Trio, who helps like all the way from middle school all the way up to college, help Black and Brown youth, inclusive of Asians, right, to ascend, right, to leave K-12, the K-12 experience with some social capital to ascend. Because we know this, social capital is almost everything when it
Mm.
comes to writing your essay, what's on your resume, you know what I mean? How do you talk in the interview if you get interviewed for these
Hmm.
college practices and jobs? Talk about the profession, right? That's almost like 80% of the work. So McNair Scholars, right, which I just learned about recently, the Upward Bound project, right?
Yeah.
I'm worried that it's going to hit their funding sources
Mm.
because affirmative action is linked to DEI, kind of DEI like diverse equity inclusion like funding resources, which are connected to social justice. Like they're all kind of interrelated. Social justice funding, which relates to McNair, relates to Trio, right? So I'm worried about that aspect of it. And I'm also worried about the aspect of the interpersonal. So now what is that going to tell Black, Latinx, Asian, let's just use those three for now,
All right.
youth, um, about each other in
Mm.
relationality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Like, will it further divide us as a group?
That's the first thing that comes to mind for
That's
me.
right. Like, I'm worried. I'm worried that it's gonna further divide our group, and we're already divided because we're gonna talk about the model minority inevitably in this, right?
Right.
But it will divide further, even if it's not. We never meant it to. Like, it's so funny. We don't know what things are going to happen until it's out in the ecosystem, and then it's impacting people, right? So now it's going to impact the relationship and the potential solidarity of these groups, and I fight for that. Like part of my like sub research topic is how do Asian Americans, Filipino Americans specifically, build cross-racial solidarity with our groups. And my like template has been specifically with the Black community, right? I wonder what that, if we use a metric to study this now, is it going to, it's hard to measure this, right? But like if it's going to really create what do you call that? I already felt this. But let me just like use personal anecdotes. Okay. This is already happening in real time. So like I mini stories because stories are sticky, right?
Yes.
I had I took I went to my master's in arts and education at Harvard, and I took an ethnic studies course, which drastically changed my perspective and why I do what I do now. But I had a group project with this homie name, was not a homie now, but this guy named Raphael, and he was someone that I thought was for BIPOC coalition building, and in reality, I think because of trauma and harm that he's experienced through other Asian Americans, you know, in his own personal life, he has mapped it across all Asians, right?
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So like he texted me, I blocked him, but like, he texted me like, "I hate you all," right? Like,
Yo,
whoa,
come on.
like what?
That's
Like what
wild.
like I haven't spoken to him since 2017, 18, bro, and to know that that exists and you took an ethnic studies course with me, ethnic studies in that course, the outcome was coalition building across our races and ethnicities. That tells me these policies are having that effect already. It's like setting the trigger for some people, you know? It's so deep, bro, and
Man.
we're just waiting to see what more is going to happen, not just in higher ed, but all throughout, not just K-12, all throughout. Because this is arguably post higher education now, right? Because I don't know if he's in higher ed, but we're professionals now. So like if he's deemed as professional, this is the whole gamut, right? So we need everything's implicated as to round it out.
That's troubling. That's troubling, man. And
And
if we don't,
he's Black and Latinx, like he's Black and Latinx identifying. So I'm like, at first I thought he was a ally, right? And it sounded like that because he wrote for some Asian American news journalistic platforms. But to know that he's still hard, like he still holds that trauma, the unhealed space, and then wants to enact that onto my community is just troubling. And I wish him healing. You know, like no, I wish him no harm. I wish him healing, and wish people like him healing because there's just so much, right? To for us, I can't even. I'm not going to be the healer. You know what I mean? Because I don't have the time, and
yeah.
nor don't have the positionality right now. But there are people like him, not just Raphael. There's more people like him across the United States. You know what I'm
Well,
saying?
he's got to want to heal also. And the seeds of trauma and hurt and division are so deep, right? That it's gonna take more than one individual being the healer. It's gonna take a willingness for us to come to the table, develop some proximity, try to understand each other and work through our issues together. And talking about issues, one of the issues that you present in your book is the invisibility of Asian American populations within K-12 education. And so it made me wonder, what are some practical steps schools can take to ensure representation of less visible groups, such as Southeast Asian groups, Pacific Islanders, and low-income Asian Americans within curricula and school policies? And I think specifically about some of my experience growing up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, where at that time there were some
Mm-hmm.
Vietnamese folks, there were some Cambodian folks, and especially in Lowell, Massachusetts. And I believe Lowell has the biggest population of Cambodian people in the United States after Long Beach, California. And so,
Wow.
but it got me to think. I'm like, wow, I'm looking at the experience of these particular groups, Cambodian folks, Vietnamese folks in the United States, in the Northeast. I'm seeing that, oh, snap, like one of the reasons we relate to each other is because we're both coming through the mud. We're both coming up through the struggle. This is me thinking as a youngster, you know what I'm saying? And so it just made me wonder about those groups. And I didn't know all the history and context of what those groups have experienced. But I knew enough, even at a young age, I knew enough to understand that their experience seemed quite different than some of the mainstream Asian American groups, if you will.
Yeah. Just a quick note on that. Like, I think we connected last time, but I want to just to make it note. Like, I did get a chance to be in Lowell and Lawrence
Oh, word?
simultaneously because they're so close to each other, right?
Yeah.
And so I got my training done for coaching in Lowell, like I think in that area, and then because I noticed that there was a huge Southeast Asian Institute or like programming there, and I was like, oh my goodness,
It's a hub.
like, like this is the hub, like teacher programming, Asian American. I was like, I need to, like, if I after this get placed in Lowell, for example, oh, I know I'm going to be thriving, right? And then Lawrence,
Wow.
I had a chance to teach at Lawrence and coach high school educators, pre-service educators in Lawrence High School, right? And
Yo, I
Lawrence High
used to work at
School,
Lawrence High and Low. Then I graduated from Lawrence High and used to teach at
no
Lawrence High School.
way, no,
Absolutely.
it was a ninth grade academy. So
Oh, I was there in December presenting my book, Blue Ink Tears, to the whole ninth grade academy. Oh, I love it. I love it, Tony.
dude, I'm telling you, like, and when you say my Dominican students, they were there. Okay, Dominicans were there. They were also freshly there. Like, I know students who were there who were just pushed up without having the right resources and whatnot to be there. So, I just want to make that note that I know about Lawrence, I know about Lowell, but to go back to your question about like what policies, and I think there's a lot going on right now. I feel like I need to give some context and I'll zoom into policy. So since that is like where I'm at now, like right now, since 2020, right, Stop Asian Hate movement like kind of grew out of after the murder of George Floyd at that moment. It's like the racial reckoning year, right, quote unquote. And at the same time, Donald Trump at the time was like stoking scapegoating Asian Americans for COVID 19, right?
Right.
Which gave the permission from the internal racism from people that had not internalized, but like the internal racism they harbored towards Asian Americans to just like act upon it, right? So we had a lot of these hate crimes,
Yo, and sorry,
violence.
Tony, because now you're saying that, and I'm like, yo, it's wild because now he just picked another group, and now he's just focusing on the Haitians and the Venezuela. Yo, this is crazy. Now,
It's
how can people
crazy.
see this? How can people not see this and be like, this is so wrong?
So wrong and so lame and so typical, right,
Mhm.
of this person. It's like a nightmare again. It's a nightmare that just never ends, right? And because it becomes it comes at such a national stage. So yeah. So there's that ever since that the 2020 Stop Asian Hate movement arose, 2021, 2022, Asian Americans really mobilized, right? Something we call it a movement right now. In my work, I write about the movement through a lens of curricular policy. One of the highest, a lot of groups, a lot of funding got assembled, Asian Americans assembled. Sometimes they call them the Asian American Avengers, depending on who you are. I consider myself one of them. And education was like one of the top solutions when they started, like when communities such as like Stop API Hate orgs were like collecting data, like, what do you want? Education was one of the tops, and civil rights legislation, right? So I fit into that narrative, and since then, states have been publishing and passing Asian American K-12 policy, right? Florida included. I know you're in Florida, but there's 7 states right now that have like mandates for that. And policy will not save us. Let me just make that clear. I study policy to practice, right? And I look at the policies, I read them with a critical race lens, and I'm like, well, very typical. You only include in that Asian American education policy the mandate of Japanese incarceration. Like they say internment, but I say incarceration because you're doing it to your own people. And then also Chinese exclusion. What happened to the rest of the Asians, right? In the curricula, you know what I mean? So like when we talk about policy, some tangible things, I'm going to talk about all the levels because now I can speak to it because now I coach superintendents, principals, teachers, right? Like I have experience to be able to talk all that from a macro lens. Superintendents need to be adopting these policies. I straight up think this from a district lens. Like Verona here, the superintendent, even when the policy did not pass for Wisconsin, like I think a couple years ago, the superintendent of Verona area high school where I live, he adopted it. He's a Black man. So I'm not saying that because he's Black, he understood it, but he understood it. He understood the assignment. He understood. He's like, we needed this policy. This is ethnic studies. So we need this. So district superintendents have a lot of power to do that. And then they need to garner some funding because it can't be it can't be like an unfunded bill. They need to put some funding to it. So Connecticut's a great case study for this. Connecticut allocated like 100K, 100 something K towards this project to at least hire a curriculum specialist to make sure this has teeth. We need a policy to have teeth. Now, it's going to take some time for the curriculum to actually get created, right? To actually be included. So again, policy won't save us. Educators at this point can be adopting and weaving in. I always tell when I'm on tour with this book, I tell teachers, I'm like, this is for the practitioner who can't wait for policy because it teaches you a blueprint of like, well, here's some texts you can adopt. You can weave in poetry from other Asian American groups,
Mhm.
specifically Southeast Asians, West Asians, especially with Palestinian genocide, right? Weave in the emotional intelligence of this poetry into your curriculum. It could be the start of your class. It could be the end of a class. It could be kids can reflect on it, right, during their advisory period, it can set the tone for, a writing project. So much we could do, but those are just practical things down now as we get down to the lower level. I'm jumping from like superintendent to teacher, but like the principal level, the principal needs to actually create some systems to give it teeth. Remember I said giving the policy teeth? They need to give us teeth by advocating and say, okay, so educators, so we're going to have money for this. Here's some money for this. Here's some books that I've like looked at from New York and Connecticut, since those are the expertises, like the places where people are looking at right now in New Jersey. Here's some free curriculum you can look at, you can weave in, and then here's some local curriculum that we can create and have opportunity to co-create because I know locally the narratives at Verona per se won't map itself towards a Middleton, a Monona, wherever, Madison, right? They're different. right? So the principal needs to get involved with at least the accountability process. And then now to the coach level, the coach needs to get involved by helping the teacher kind of like actually implement it in their lesson plan, right? When you look at lesson plans, and I look at lesson plans, I'm like, when do we ever use Asian American narratives
Mm.
in your example of STEM or math problems or rarely, right? And if we do, there's a research about this. Dr. So Yoon Ahn is a Kennesaw State professor, and she kind of assessed the curriculum standards of the US, right? All 50 states. And she found in her research that the majority of any mandated curricula or like included curriculum around Asian American narratives happens to do with Japanese or Chinese or East Asian narratives, right? Which tells again what I already knew my body as a Filipino. Like I knew I was going to be omitted and invisibilized,
Wow.
right? So you need to like that's just empirical data. You need to actively look and be like, this is not the whole story. And this is for everybody from all stages. This is not the whole story. So what am I going to actively do about it to make sure that the rest of Asia is included? So I'll stop there for now because I gave you a couple
Yeah,
things
nah,
from
nah,
all
nah.
levels.
That's loaded. That's loaded. And one of the things that you said that would obviously catch my attention was that we should weave in poetry in the curriculum. And so I want to model the example. We're going to pivot real quick. I didn't have this as part of my plans, but we got to be open to pivot. So, I'm going to hit you with a little excerpt, a little excerpt. How will they hold us?
Oh, yes.
How will they teach this invisible race beyond the silence outside of October and May? What if they drop one of us? Will they pick us up like a fallen soldier, or will they stumble over a minefield and fumble us forgotten? Who entrusted them with our spices, jackfruit, and diamonds? Will they style us windows and pick up a mirror? Will they dance a revolution, or will they wallflower reform? Will they wade in the binary or swim ultraviolet and upstream? Will they study our mountains and movements? Do they know us beyond a hashtag? Beyond San Francisco and Times Square, beyond the black and white binary that flattens and binds us. I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna stop there. You
Bro,
went
I
too
just
hard.
love
You
that you
went
read
too
that.
hard, Tony.
I love that you read this because I was going to read part of this, but this is the first time I've had in a podcast, in an interview, that someone else read it for me. And because you're a spoken word poet, I love hearing your voice in it. So I definitely need a piece of this clip 100% just to hear it for myself, that someone else is reading it, someone else who's not Asian American. It's just powerful to me, man, because you also know how to read it. Because some people will stumble over
Mm.
some of the syntax and not actually read it the way that I want it to be read. And you read it the way I wanted other people to read it. So it's brilliant that you brought it up. Anyhow, yes.
Listen, this piece is so powerful. We could do a whole episode on this whole piece,
Yep.
just
You're right.
breaking it down. Like you're giving us so much to think about, so much to wrestle with. You're tying in all types of history there. Like I know when I was reading it, I'm like, oh snap! Like these there's such intentionality in the way you frame this. The line with the minefield. Oh my. Oh my, like I'm just thinking about all the folks of Asian descent from different areas that could relate to that right there. I I remember seeing this documentary on Laos, and I didn't know much about it before. And
Mm-hmm.
the documentary was talking about essentially a minefield that's kind of it's still there from all this time after, and the folks are
100%.
still yo. I was like, I didn't know.
I didn't know either. Honestly,
Mind
the last two
blown,
years I
bro.
didn't know.
Mind
Yeah,
blown. And I'm like,
I did
yo,
not know that.
how cruel can humanity be? And how much have these people suffered? And so, respect for the way you frame this and for using poetry as a vehicle to address real and deep issues and for pushing us to see beyond the surface level stuff, right? To not look at any particular group and see them, right, as invisible, pun intended, but to be able to appreciate all the diversity within the group, all the nuance um, within each group, all the different history that each perspective group brings with them, and all the richness. And I feel like that's part of what this is challenging me to do, and part of what your book is challenging the reader to do, right? To ensure that we are going beyond surface level, that we are teaching the invisible race, that we are embodying a pro-Asian American lens in schools.
Man, I mean, isn't this true about, sometimes you can't really teach something unless done through a lens of emotion, like emotional intelligence.
Mm.
One, you can't teach a truth, is what I'm saying, without the lens of emotional intelligence. And then I think that's lacking in education at large. And then two, somebody can't even teach truth without doing using like different modes like poetry, right? I know that I'm taking a Du Boisian class, right? And I'm so glad that I'm getting out of ed policy, which is my world right now, and going full Du Boisian, right? Like
Mm.
I'm like who I'm already I realized I was already impacted by him without even knowing that I'd read his work, like Souls of Black
Those
Folk,
are black
right?
folk. Ooh.
Oh my goodness. And then it's like I see that you went macro with Philadelphia Negro and you flexed what you could do because you had to, because, of the time period, but then you really zoomed in to how can you really understand this community without going to the soul, right? And really, that's why I wanted to put poetry in here. It's very Du Boisian to understand that there's poetry in here to really hit the soul of people because you can't make people visible or combat. Let's reframe this. Invisibility is kind of more of like a neutral term to me. You can't combat the omission, the active act of erasing and omitting us without going to the soul and understanding and knowing us there, right? You can see us on the census, you can see us on TV and popular culture, K-pop, you name it, right? But until you really get to the soul of Asian Americans and read my work, specifically how my work as an Asian American body impacts this work, then you really don't understand. You're only half there, right? Because the embodied experience of Asian Americans has not been captured, right? Or it's been captured or has been captured and marginalized, right? It's not put into the fore, right? When we need it to be a national discourse, right? And we're still at the beginning stages, bro. Like, but yeah, I'm so glad that you pivoted because it's so important to really include poetry. That was one of my recommendations. Is like you poetry is such a it's so useful because it can be quick, something short. You can do so much with it functionally,
Absolutely.
logistically. Like I said, you can spend like 10 minutes on it, or like you said, we can spend a whole class period on it, line by line, going to the history of each line, right? What does that make you invoke? Let's draw it out. Let's figure out this cross-racial solidarity of Malcolm X, right? Like, what does that look like, right? And that could be the entire class period. So never underestimate poetry. As we both know, we're both poets.
That's right. That's right. Oh man. Listen, man, get ready. I'm already mentally planning the next episode. We're gonna chop. We're gonna do it. We're
Yes,
gonna
yes,
break
yes.
this
We have more to
poem
talk
down.
about.
We're gonna break this poem down. All right. There's so much ground that we could cover, and there's so much content to get into. But y'all need to go and purchase Tony's book. But before I say more about the book, let me just let's hear what you got to say in terms of a message of encouragement. What what do you have to offer the audience as it relates to encouragement? Because people need to be encouraged during these
Yeah,
times,
yeah.
and certainly your book does that in many ways. But today, in this moment, what's your message of encouragement for the people?
Yeah, so message of encouragement. I love that. And that's pro-Asian, right? Like I want to not just focus on all the negative sum of our parts, right? That's not us. So the book itself will highlight moments where we had some wins. Asian American community had some wins. Obviously, there's consequences to our wins, right? Like who's winning, right? What's winning? I think in the last few years, we've seen after the Stop AAPI hate movements really started, people really taking a look at us and being like, oh, you do undergo oppression and racism and colonialization. People are starting to only starting though, but
Yeah.
starting is important to have those conversations. And when I go to different cities, like I can already compare it like from 2020 to now, the same groups, if I ask them like, hey, have you heard of Stop Asian Hate Movement? People will raise their hand, man. Like everywhere. I mean, I do talks everywhere, man. And I can compare it from then and now. People know about it. So at least they know a reference point. And having that reference point is huge because now people will be like, yeah, it's important, right? It's important. That's why you have your month. That's why you have your thing, right? Like that's why this book is. And then after that, like a lot of community members, myself, other Asian American colleagues, the Asian American Avengers, are producing work like mine, right? So mine is like one of many, right? Like I feel like I like to highlight mine, but like I said, Asian Americans Not a Color is another one. There is my friend is coming out, Bianca Mabutalawi. She's an Asian American sociologist, has this Asian American manifesto, and that's something I'm really excited about for next year, right? And it's really hitting at colonialization. So it really brought up its impacts on our community and sociology. So I'm really just excited to see our community like spotlighted, and then from that spotlight, we find each other because like we were invisibilized, right? So like we didn't even know who to turn to, but now all of a sudden we're like, yo, we're homies, we're homies. And then I can also delineate who's not my homie. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
you know who's not doing it in a way. Like my dissertation will be about the tale of two coalitions: the coalition of Asian Americans who are abolitionists, anti-racist, womanists, feminists, right? And there's a coalition that is doing it for more legitimacy purposes, right?
Mm.
For cultural power to put their name out there, right? And that's not what I'm about. So to know that I can delineate that for people and be like, okay, I can put you in the right direction if you want. And these are people on the ground doing this work and have been doing this work for the last 30 years. That makes me excited because now that once invisibilized community, I have the privilege and opportunity to help bring them up since I'm very public facing, right? So I can help amplify their work, right?
Right.
So that makes me super happy that I can be a part of that process, and they're already getting love. Like other communities are getting the love they deserve. So that's a bright spot for me.
Dope, dope, man. And I think that's very necessary to people be able to engage with folks like you who have that knowledge, who could point them in the right direction, who are able to offer them resources, who are able to share, like, yo, these are the people that been doing this, been on the ground. You might not be familiar with them yet, but they've been doing it. They deserve their flowers. Their work should be amplified. We need that. We need
Mm-hmm.
that. And so talking about, amplification, who's the person that you bring to the table? If you had an opportunity to have lunch with anybody dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Yo, so can I tell you something? So I'm gonna actually this person I thought about, I'm actually potentially gonna have dinner with. So it's kind of like I haven't had it yet, but I finally got to a point where I'm about to, which makes me like this is freedom dreaming for me. Like I feel like I've kind of made it within the abolitionist space. Is this poet named Bo Sia? So I don't know if you know Def Jam poetry. I know you know Def
Yes,
Jam
sir.
poetry. I know
Yes,
some people
sir.
don't know it, but we
That
know
that
it.
poetry, yeah.
That poetry from Mos Def, right? Formerly for Mos Def, but Bo Seal was one of the first Asian American poets that I saw back in undergrad in 2007, bro. I've been following his journey for such a long time, modeling
Wow.
myself, my poetry after his. He did the Asian American Invasion. Like he's the first Asian American who I've seen be loud on stage, right? Um, he was homies with Saul Williams, right? Like in
Oh, Saul
Slam, they
Williams.
were yeah,
Beast.
they're
Beast.
homies, man. Saul made that movie Slam featured Bo Sia in it and other homies, right? I see them on Instagram talking all the time. But over the years, because of the internet, because of like the work I've been doing, and I kind of put my work in as well, I think I garnered a level of respect where I want to have dinner with him. We're actually going to have an event in November this year together in a talk. And to me, it's going to be like ancestors to descendants. So to know that I was in part of helping build that. I know that wasn't everything, but like this is such a critical time to build with each other intergenerationally. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
People might not know Bosia as much as they did back in the day, but that has never left me. He has never left the impact on me. So I always want to reconnect and be like, yo, Bosia, yo, like go. He was one of the pioneers of this work, getting
Wow.
this poetry public facing, right, as opposed to getting it on the written page. To me, that's powerful, and I hope he has time for dinner. That's my question. Will he have time for dinner? You know how everyone's busy.
Yeah.
So I want him to be at the dinner table. Hopefully we can grab a drink or whatever, and we can just chop it up about what's happening today, what's impacting my community, and the world at large.
Oh, that's great, man. That's great. Wow. Two poets at the table. I love it. I love it. Well, for individuals that want to learn more about your work, that want to connect with you, or maybe they simply want to get a copy of Teaching the Invisible Race, Embodying a Pro-Asian American Lens in School, where can they do that?
Yes. You can go to TonyRosaSpeaks.com and that will populate all the information you need. Tony with a Y, rosaspeaks.com, and you'll see it there. And wherever books are sold, I mean, like there's audio version read by dope actor Tim Lanuibos, who's also Asian American. He was on Star Trek. He was on all these other things. I got
Wow.
really lucky with him reading my book because his voice is like Roberto. Your voice was beautiful reading the poem, probably better than his. I'll be honest with you because you're a poet. But the way he read it, he has kind of like a deep voice as well, and it's just so clear and crisp. So he has the audio, and then like there's Kindle, there's it's wherever books are sold at this point.
Okay.
Now, I would say if you can go and support local bookstores, please do so. Or if you want to go directly to me, um, email me at tonyrosaspeaks@gmail.com and we can work something out where you can get a very personalized signed copy of this and we can figure out how delivery works. But other than that, that's where I'm at. I'm on IG and X. I don't have time for other platforms right now because I'm a parent. We know this.
We
But
know.
if you want to get on IG or X or Twitter, formerly Twitter, you can hit me up. I'm pretty accessible. I try to reach out to people because I know this work needs to be as accessible as possible.